أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. Verse number 56 ويحلفون بالله إنهم لمنكم وما هم منكم ولكنهم قوم يفرقون لو يجدون ملجأ أو مغارات أو مدخلا لولوا إليه وهم يجمحون. They swear by Allah that they belong to you, but they do not belong to you. Rather, they are a frightened lot. If they could find a refuge or a hideout or a hole to creep into, they would turn to it in frantic haste. Now, some other descriptions of the munafiqun after their attitude towards the Prophet. Now, here it is mentioned their own inner attitude while they are living among Muslims. What the two verses want to say is that really, first of all, they say that they are from you, they are a part of you, but it's just out of fear. Because they are living among you, they fear that they might lose their position, they might lose their property, their links with the people. That's why they are saying that we are with you. So, وَيَحْلِفُونَ بِاللَّهِ, they swear by Allah, إِنَّهُمْ لَمِنْكُمْ. This is of course a situation which is not described for us in Tafseer, but probably some of them did something which showed their difference with Muslimun and their separation from them. Now they came and they swore by Allah that we are from you, we are a part of you, we are not going to desert you. وَمَا هُمْ مِنْكُمْ, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would inform that they are not from you, of course, but they are frightened to say that we are not from you. وَلَكِنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ يَفْرَقُونَ. And of course this would tell us again about the situation of Medina at that time when the Muslimun had the power. Of course there were a lot of people who did not like that power, who wanted other type of settlement and arrangement, but they feared that if they mention it, that would have had adverse effects on them. And mainly these were the leaders of Medina prior to the entrance of the Prophet to that city, who were waiting, who were just having a look into the future and planting conspiracies so that they could couple the government of the Prophet and they themselves take the leadership. So they are really afraid. وَلَكِنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ يَفْرَقُونَ. Now the attitude is very beautifully explained here in the next verse, that how frightened they are and how eagerly they are waiting for something to happen so that they find an escape from this situation. لَوْ يَجِدُونَ مَلْجَأً, if they could find a refuge, أَوْ مَغَارَاتٍ, or a hideout. Magharat is something like a ghar, a cave or something in which they could go and hide. أَوْ مُدَّخَلًا, Muddakhal is a hole in the earth, in the ground, that animals would creep into. Even if they could have found something like that, of course among your society, they would have turned into it in frantic haste. They are not happy at all with the type of situation in which they are living. And you can imagine, as I said before, you can imagine how was the situation of Medina at that time. You could see what type of people were living in Medina. And of course you could imagine they wouldn't have sat silent after the demise of the Prophet. They would have done their most somehow to change the situation which was, of course, going on during the time of the Prophet. If this is their attitude, if they are so frustrated in the living in the society in Medina, at the time of the Prophet, you can imagine they wouldn't have left any stone unturned to change the situation after the demise of the Prophet. So they would have turned into it in frantic haste. Now, another sign of their unhappiness in the society and a sign of their disbelief in the Prophet, although they were actually confessing that they were mu'minun, a sign of their disbelief is what is mentioned in the next verse, verse number 58. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَلْمِزُكَ فِي الصَّدَقَاتِ فَإِنْ أُعْطُوا مِنْهَا رَضُوا وَإِنْ لَمْ يُؤْتَوْا مِنْهَا إِذَا هُمْ يَسْخَطُونَ. There are some of them who blame you regarding the distribution of the charities. If they are given from them, they are pleased, but if they are not given from them, behold, they are displeased. This blame in sadaqat, of course, sadaqat here is the zakat, which was being distributed by the Prophet at his own time. The way he distributed the zakat, because zakat is a sadaqa wajiba, it is sadaqah, it's a charity which is compulsory upon Muslims to give, so that it distributed to those people who deserve it. Some people, again, you can see the attitude. Some people came and blamed the Prophet that you are not doing justice. You do not know how you have to distribute the zakat, and probably you better take our advice or consult with us how you should distribute them. Now, there is a very interesting story about this verse and the people who actually blamed the Prophet for such a distribution, the way he distributed the zakat, and also the booties of the war and whatever that should have been distributed. First of all, we have a hadith in Tafseer al-Qummi that, well, of course, where the zakat should be placed, how it should be distributed is explained in the following verses. However, there is no mention of the wealthy people in it. Of course, there is al-mu'allafatu qulubuhum, those whose hearts are to be attracted towards Islam, but that is different. That's different from Muslimun and from those munafiqun who were living around the Prophet. And in Tafsir al-Qummi it says when the Prophet distributed the sadaqat, the wealthy people, the heads of tribes, they started to somehow blame. Lams is to blame and ridicule. That's how the Prophet is distributing. We are helping him in wars. We are bringing them all these sadaqat and zakawat and booties of war, and he is distributing it among the people who are no one. And this was the type of attitude that was existing at that time, that everything distributed by a king or by a ruler or by a chieftain should be given to important people, not to the poor and downtrodden people. And this is actually what happened later on at the time of the third caliph, which rose the anger of many of the companions of the Prophet, which led to those skirmishes and then troubles and killings. However, the type of mentality was that these should be distributed among the nobility, not the poor people who are no one. So they came, they discussed it, and they said that, well, he doesn't know how he should distribute the wealth in the society so that it brings growth and prosperity. There were some other groups, of course, who thought that they are more just than the prophets, who thought that justice is something that they only know about it. Even the Prophet doesn't know what justice is and how they have to distribute, how he has to distribute the wealth, the zakat. Now, these were people who later on developed into a type of very harsh and at the same time pious-looking people who formed the Khawarij at the time of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Of course, they were existing at that time, at the time of the Prophet as well. They thought themselves, as it is said, more pious than the Pope. They thought that they are more pious than the Prophet, more just than the Prophet. There's one hadith which is very famous and reported in many books. Now, this hadith is reported in Bukhari, also by An-Nasai, by Tabari, and many other writers and writers of hadith. This is from Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, the well-known companion of the Prophet. He says that قال بينما النبي صلى الله عليه وآله يقسم قسما إذ جاءه ذو الخويصر التميمي. When the Prophet was distributing some wealth, يقسم قسما, some wealth which was, of course, the money of zakat, sadaqat, someone called ذو الخويصر from Banu Tamim. He came to him, and he was a well-known person, very respected. He said, فَقَالَ اِعْدِلْ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. He said, Ya Rasulullah, be just, do justice in distributing this wealth. فَقَالَ وَيْلَكَ وَمَنْ يَعْدِلْ إِذَا لَمْ أَعْدِلْ. The Prophet said, what are you saying? Who would be just if I am not just? I am the Prophet of God. I am chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so to speak, to guide you. Now, if I deviate from the path of justice, who would do justice in this world? فقال عمر بن الخطاب يا رسول الله ائذن لي فأضرب عنقه. And Umar ibn al-Khattab said, Ya Rasulullah, let me just cut his neck, cut his head. فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم دعه فإن له أصحابا يحقر أحدكم صلاته مع صلاتهم. Then the Prophet said, no, leave him, because he is going to have companions. He is going to form a group that one of you, any one of you, would regard their salat, their prayer, trivial when compared to their prayer, to the prayer of the companions of this man. وَصِيَامَهُ مَعَ صِيَامِهِمْ. And you would regard your fasting trivial as nothing when compared to the fasting of these people. However, يَمْرُقُونَ مِنَ الدِّينِ كَمَا يَمْرُقُ السَّحْمُ مِنَ الرَّمِيَةِ. But they would go out of the religion as an arrow would go out of the ark. آيَتُهُمْ رَجُلٌ أَسْوَدٌ. The sign of them is a black man. أَحَدُ ثَدْيَيْهِ مِثْلُ ثَدْيِ الْمَرْأَةِ. One of whose breast is like the breast of a woman. This man, this black man. يَخْرُجُونَ عَلَى حِينَ فِرْقَةٍ مِنَ النَّاسِ. And they will revolt. يَخْرُجُونَ means they revolt when there is a separation, a disagreement among the people at a time. Then, of course, Abu Sa'id says that قَالَ فَنَزَلَتْ فِيهِمْ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَلْمِزُكَ فِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. And some of them are those who blame you about sadaqat. This Abu Sa'id mentions that, the Abu Sa'id who reports the hadith, he mentions that أشهد أني سمعت هذا من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. I witness that I heard this from the Prophet. وأشهد أن عليا حين قتلهم وأنا معه جيء بالرجل على النعت الذي نعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. And I witnessed that when Ali killed these people, and I was with him, a man was brought to him from among those killed, who had exactly the same description that Prophet had described for Ali ibn Abi Talib. And in fact, in many other historical accounts, we have that when Ali ibn Abi Talib killed Khawarij, he was looking for someone like this man among those killed in the battlefield, until his companions found him and brought him to him. And then Ali ibn Abi Talib said how truthful was the Prophet, saying the sign of these people is a black man having this description. Now, what of course, all of us know about Khawarij and their attitude, how outwardly they were looking so pious that everyone, of course, were deceived by their appearance. I mean, you can put yourself in place of the people who were fighting this group. You would have really been afraid of fighting with such people who you had seen during the nights. They were awake, praying before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. During the days they were fasting, reciting the Quran, and all this type of austere piety that they had somehow forced upon themselves. And then you would have fought them for the sake of salat and sawm. I mean, this was really amazing. As Amirul Mu'mineen himself says that I plucked the eye of fitnah. أَنَا فَقَعْتُ عَيْنَ الْفِتْنَةِ I plucked the eye of fitnah among the Muslims. And no one but me could do it after me. Because it needed someone really, really with deep knowledge of religion to fight with such people. Because everyone would tremble, would shake when coming, I mean every Muslim who is believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when comes across such people and wants to fight them, it would be very difficult. Now, such an attitude, of course, always exists among some religious people. And you could almost see this in our time. Some people are very pious, very austere, but very stringent in some ideas, somehow pressing on some aspects of religion, which in their own view are very important. But it comes out of a misunderstanding, and everyone thinks that these people are really, really so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why it's very, very difficult to deal with such people. And as Amirul Mu'mineen says, of course, Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam had the severest type of tribulations when he was not a caliph and when he was a caliph. And as he explains himself in Khutbah Shaqshaqiyya, he says, فَلَمَّا نَهَضَتُ بِالْأَمْرِ After all those events which went by, as soon as, well, they came to me, they asked me for bay'ah, I didn't want to come forth for this position, but they came to me, they crowded in a way that Hassan and Hussein were almost killed by the crowd, and of course I took the bay'ah from them. But فَلَمَّا نَهَضْتُ بِالْأَمْرِ As soon as I stood up for this responsibility, نَكَثَتْ طَائِفَةٌ A group broke their bay'ah, their pledge, who were Talha and Zubayr and those companions who, of course, were the people who brought others to make bay'ah with Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam, and then they broke their own bay'ah, their own pledge. نَكَثَتْ طَائِفَةٌ وَمَرَغَ أُخْرَى And another group went out of the religion, means these Khawarij, who were called Mariqin, وَقَسَتَ آخَرُونَ And others became oppressors, starting to wrong everyone, who means the Muawiyah and his group. And then he says, كَأَنَّهُمْ لَمْ يَسْمَعُوا اللَّهِ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى تلك الدار الآخرة نجعلها للذين لا يريدون علوا في الأرض ولا فسادا والآخرة للمتقين. It is as if they had not heard this verse of the Quran that Allah says in it, the other world we put it for those who do not seek any fasad or any superiority in this world over others. And then he says, Bala wallah laqad sama'uha wa wa'awha. I swear by God, they had heard this verse, they had understood it fully. وَلَكَنْ حَلِيَتِ الدُّنْيَا فِي أَعْيُنِهِمْ But the dunya became very, very much decorated in their eyes, and this is why they did it. So, if we analyze what happened after the Prophet, we would see that the root of all these different groupings were existent at the time of the Prophet, as it is mentioned here about the Khawarij and the people who thought that they were more just than the Prophet himself. Then at the time of Amir al-Mu'minin, they thought that they were more pious than Ali ibn Abi Talib. And there is always this danger that people who worship much, they might think that they have an authority in religion without knowledge. This is very important. And that is why we are told that to be an alim is much better than to be an abid, because there is always this danger for worshippers, for abidun, who because they are ignorant, they lack knowledge, but they worship so much, they think that they are better than others, they have gained an authority in religion. And therefore they can come and tell the people with knowledge what they have to do and what they haven't to do. So here, in the case of the Prophet as well, we have someone coming and thinking that Prophet is not just. And they are more just than the Prophet, and they know better how the Prophet should distribute the zakat among the people. So here it says, وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَلْمِزُكَ فِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. And of course, what comes here is although it is tainted with a type of veneer of piety, but at the bottom of it is the love of this world, because you do not give them what they want, and then therefore they start to bring all these issues in front of you. فَإِنْ أُعْطُوا مِنْهَا رَضُوا وَإِنْ لَمْ يُعْطَوْا مِنْهَا إِذَا هُمْ يَسْخَطُونَ. There are some of them who blame you regarding the distribution of charities. If they are given from them, they are pleased. But if they are not given from them, behold, they are displeased. وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ رَضُوا مَا آتَاهُمُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَقَالُوا حَسْبُنَا اللَّهُ سَيُؤْتِينَا اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ وَرَسُولُهُ إِنَّا إِلَى اللَّهِ رَاغِبُونَ. And it would have been better for them. Of course, this is not mentioned, but we understand it from the style and from the trend of the literature which is going here. If it would have been better for them if they had been pleased with what Allah and His Apostle gave them. Now here, مَا آتَاهُمُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. In fact, Allah says whatever the Prophet does is somehow whatever Allah wants to do. You should not separate between Prophet and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what they did actually. They said, well, of course you are the messenger of God, but in many issues you don't know how you have to behave, how you have to treat. Unless, of course, a revelation comes to you. And this is why in many, many verses of the Quran you will see that Allah all the time says, me and my Prophet are one, are the same thing. Whatever the Prophet says is whatever I want. It's not the case that you have to wait for a revelation to come so that you know that this is what comes from me. Allah and the Prophet are the same. Ati'ullah wa ati'ur Rasul. Obey Allah, obey the Prophet. The same thing. And here it says, whatever the Prophet is giving you is whatever I want to give you. مَا آتَاهُمُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَقَالُوا حَسْبُنَا اللَّهُ. And he said, Allah is sufficient for us. Of course, here there is no وَرَسُولُهُ anymore, because in this matter and in every matter is the reliance is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But whatever the Prophet says come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, Allah is sufficient for us. There's always this danger of falling into the pitfall of extremism from both sides. I mean, sometimes we want to clear ourselves from a sort of shirk which is somehow imagined in giving higher status to the Prophet. And by that way, we try to diminish the value of the Prophet and the position of the Prophet. On the other side, we want to give higher position to the Prophet, and we fall into the pitfall of giving him more value that Allah has given him, taking him up to somewhere close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and becoming mushriks. It's very difficult. It's like moving on an edge. And anyway we fall in a pitfall of extremism, of diminishing the right of the Prophet, and also the A'immah alayhi salam, the same thing. Nowadays, of course, unfortunately, in many Shia circles, we see that there is this calamity of going into extremism, of exaggerating about the the position of Aimma alayhimus salam, and amazingly enough, this has somehow raised some eyebrows in Qom as well in Iran. The other day, Ayatollah Jawadi Tabrizi had actually complained about the way some speakers speak in Iran about the position of Aimma alayhimus salam, saying that this is leading to shirk, what they are saying. And these are being somehow broadcast in Iranian television, and this is why he was so angry. Ayatollah Jawad is saying that although some people might come and say, some speakers say some issues in this regard on member, but why Iranian TV should broadcast them? And of course this comes out of lack of knowledge. And especially the other day, on the occasion of the demise of Imam Hassan al-Askari, one of the speakers had said that, well, of course, after Imam Hassan al-Askari, all the affairs were submitted to Imam al-As alayhi salam, and even if the rain wants to come, he is asked whether the rain should come or not. A very funny type of thing, and this was broadcast on Iranian television, which is, of course, out of ignorance of those people who listen and those people who actually think that these are good things to broadcast, which, of course, takes us to the pitfall of extremism, of exaggeration about the position of Aimma alayhimus salam, and the Prophet, the same thing. They have almost the same authority. Of course, the authority comes from the Prophet to Aimma alayhimus salam, but there is always this tangent. Then when you say that this is not right, the people start to say, no, of course, yes, that's right, but they try to diminish and diminish and diminish the position in a way that, again, we go into the pitfall of separating the Prophet from his authority that Allah has given him. And Aimma alayhimus salam. So it is very difficult. Always, whatever we do, whatever we say, we have to be thoughtful about it. We should, and of course, everything should be compared with what is in the Quran, because above the Quran, apart from the Quran, there is no criterion, there is no standard by which we could judge our ideas and our views. Now here, وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ رَضُوا مَا آتَاهُمُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ, if they had been pleased with what Allah and His Apostle gave them, وَقَالُوا حَسْبُنَا اللَّهُ, and had said, Allah is sufficient for us. سَيُؤْتِينَ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ وَرَسُولُهُ إِنَّا إِلَى اللَّهِ رَاغِبُونَ. Allah will give us out of His grace and His Apostle as well. Indeed, to Allah do we eagerly turn. This should be their attitude, that whatever they do, they should do it for going nearer and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for having an eye on a distribution from the Prophet or a grace coming from the Apostle upon them. They do it because of that. And as we know, many people at the time of the Prophet really were doing these to get some gain, as it's mentioned in this surah. And of course, Allah is correcting the attitudes, rectifying what the attitude of a mu'min should be, and how you could recognize a mu'min from a munafiq. If the attitude is for the wealth of this world, of course that's a hypocrite. If it's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's a mu'min. And this very, very famous story that in one of the battles, one of the companions of the Prophet made a very, very outstanding battle, killing many people very bravely, and at the end he was brought down by the enemy and he was killed. And people came to the Prophet and told him, Ya Rasulallah, such and such person, he was so brave, he did his best, killed so many of enemy, and at the end he became a martyr. And the Prophet said, no, he didn't become a martyr, because there was a pony on the other side. He was just fighting to go and get that. And he is the martyr of the way of pony, not the martyr of the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, these intentions are very important. Actions are only valued according to the intention by which they are accompanied. Now, then after this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the way the zakat should be distributed, and for what people this is meant, for what groups of people. إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب والغارمين وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل فريضة من الله والله عليم حكيم. Indeed, the charities are only for the poor and the needy and those employed to collect them and those whose hearts are to be reconciled, and for the freedom of the slaves and the debtors, and in the way of Allah, and for the travelers. This is an ordinance from Allah. Faridatan min Allah means this is wajib. Now, after I have mentioned to you the way it should be distributed, this has become wajib upon you to distribute the zakat in this way. Faridatan min Allah, wallahu alimun hakim, and Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. Now, 8 categories are mentioned here. This is the very famous, of course, in jurisprudential ruling taken from the Quran, that zakat should be distributed among 8 groups. Of course, it doesn't mean that it at all the times it should be divided into 8 parts and given to these 8 groups. These are the categories who qualify for receiving it. At sometimes we might not have some of these categories existing or deserving zakat, and therefore the zakat is given to other categories. But if the categories exist, then the distribution should go to all of them. Now, the 8 categories are fuqara, the poor, wal masakin, the needy. Of course, the poor and the needy are somehow overlapping. Faqir and miskin. There are lots of arguments about the difference between faqir and miskin. What is a faqir? What is a miskin? But I think the difference is quite clear-cut. Faqir is someone who, of course, is not a beggar, is not someone who always needs money, is someone who can work, is someone who is working, who has a dignity and honor in the society, but at times they don't have enough money to provide for themselves and for their families. So this is the definition of a faqir. They are in need. They are poor in the sense that they are in need, not poor in the sense that they don't have food to eat. So they say faqir is anyone who has a life according to his own dignity and honor, but at times he lacks some providence for himself and the family. And this would be determined according to the status of the person in the society. And therefore a man might have a house, might have family, might have a car, but for example in some areas of life there are things which are lacking. He cannot provide for his family or for himself during the course of the year. And this person is categorized as the poor, faqir. However, miskin is completely different. Miskin is someone who cannot run a life for himself or for his family. Like, for example, blind people, paralyzed people, people who, of course, some of these people can work, but some of these people only should live on a continuous type of providence coming from the state, from the government. So these are masakin. And also those people who have no work, no job, nothing, these are called miskin as well. They say many things in the definition of miskin as well. Some definitions which of course correspond with what I mentioned is that miskin is someone who cannot provide food for his day. So for everyday sustenance, they are in need of something coming to them, as opposed to faqir. A faqir might have, for example, a sustenance for 6 months and might not have it for another 6 months. Or if they are working, getting salary, they might have sustenance for 20 days and the next 10 days they don't have anything. They have to wait until the time comes to take the salary again. So the definition of faqir is certainly different from the definition of miskin. Miskin is someone who has no job, cannot provide, but faqir can provide for himself but is in short of some sort of amenity. So For both of these, إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين, two groups, والعاملين عليها, and those who work on it, those who are employed to collect the zakat. And this would mean that, and this was the case at the time of the Prophet and after him, there should be an organization for collecting the zakat. It's not the case that zakat should come voluntarily by the people, given to the poor or to the marja or to the government or whatever. Anyone who likes to give, gives. Anyone who doesn't like, doesn't give. No, there should be an organization for zakat. And this organization, the job of this organization would be collecting the zakat and then distributing it, identifying the people who deserve to receive the zakat, identifying the people who should pay the zakat, and of course then distributing it among them. So these are called amilina alayha, those who are employed to collect the zakat, or those who are employed to distribute the zakat. So amilina alayha here means that there should be an organization for collection and distribution of the zakat. And of course we should know that zakat would be different from tax, from government tax, because government tax is actually spent on different categories or on different items than what is mentioned here in this ayah. A government has lots of expenses which of course should be paid from the tax money, which do not correspond with the categories mentioned here in this ayah. So you never can say, so long as an Islamic government takes tax, that could be regarded as zakat. Zakat has specific type of spending, a place for spending which is different from the taxes. So even the amilina alayha, the organization for collecting the zakat, would be different from the organization for collecting the tax and for spending the tax. إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم, and those whose hearts are to be reconciled. Okay, this we have to discuss this in a bit more detail, so we leave this and the other categories inshallah for next week. وصلى الله على محمد.
I'd like to mind. There's quite a few questions here, so whoever is ready. Sisters? No?
You mentioned the groups at the time of Prophet, and the Prophet even indicated that what type of these people are and how they will grow up or how they will become. So the Prophet knew, and he also mentioned to other people that these are the groups, like the initial stages of the Khawarij that you mentioned. What sort of steps were taken by the Prophet and then later on by Imams to identify them and to check their activities, if you can explain?
Well, this is a very good question, because it comes again and again that if Prophet knew this or if the Imam knew this, why they didn't take any action to somehow rectify the situation. The point is that in a society, especially those who have some experience of government who know this, that in a society there are not one or two people who have a certain type of idea. If you want to somehow rectify something, you have to rectify it with planning rather than eliminating people. It is not possible. And there is a very interesting hadith, a telling hadith we have from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam, that he once asked about this verse, وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَلْمِزُكَ فِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. There are some people who blame you on sadaqat. And he asked one of his companions that, how many people do you think were in Medina who had this attitude of blaming the Prophet on the way he distributed the zakat? And then he himself said, you know how many they were? They were 2/3 of the society. So how could the Prophet actually rectify such an issue if 2/3 of the society have such an attitude towards him? The only thing is that, well, these verses should come saying that whatever the Prophet does is whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing. مَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. Whatever the Prophet gives, take. Whatever he doesn't give, just stop blaming the Prophet and do not do whatever you want to do. The steps, of course, taken by the Prophet were his warnings that these are going to end up in such situations. Beware of them. And especially the hadith about Al-Khuwaisara, which has come up in many books of history and hadith, that he said, leave him because he is going to have companions who would do such a thing. And anyone who really wanted to take heed of what Prophet said, who wanted to protect his religion and his faith, would have paid attention to these warnings coming by the Prophet, that this man or a group who are following him are going to end up in such a situation. So beware, do not be deceived by them, do not take their side and such issues. Otherwise, I mean, if really a tough action was going to be taken, it would have just dismembered the whole society, and it was not possible, I think.
You want to add something?
You know what you mentioned in the end, that if some tough action was to be taken, the whole society would have dismantled. Is this something we can see in the life of Imam Ali immediately after the demise of the Prophet, that he kept quite following this sort of line that if he would have taken any actions, this would have created more harm to the Islamic society? Is this an indication?
Well, this is what Amir al-Mu'minin himself mentions in many accounts. That's why I didn't take any action was because of having peace in Islamic society, having the society going, and having Islam becoming more mature, rather than to just start fighting while it's just in its fetus and its growing situation. Yeah, of course.
Sisters? Brothers? Yes.
As far as I know, there is not one single verse of the Quran where salat is not associated together with zakat. But then, as you mentioned, the verses make clear the necessity of institution or body to collect the zakat. How do you explain the absolute failure of Muslims in this respect? I mean, as far as I know, not even the Islamic Republic of Iran has a proper system for collection of zakat and enforcing zakat as a religious duty.
Yeah, that's certainly something that should be rectified and should come into place, of course. However, with regards to Islamic Republic of Iran, I think we have some sort of unofficial organizations for collection of zakat, but officially it would be very difficult at this stage to add something to the government tax, and probably the situation in the society would not allow it. But eventually, I think this is what should be done. It's very important. However, there is one thing as well that we have to bear in mind with regards to zakat mentioned in the Quran. Usually, the zakat that we mean, the compulsory zakat in the Quran, it is the term for it which is used in the Quran is sadaqat. Of course, a compulsory sadaqat. So zakat is a more general term than this compulsory sadaqat. And when we see that salat is going with the zakat all the time, it is more general than this compulsory zakat which are sadaqat. So any believer, any believer which believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there should be two components of faith existing in him. One, of course, connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by salah. The other, connecting with the people in his heart, so that they would help them financially, materially, in terms of giving, in one way or another. This might be the compulsory zakat, which are sadaqat, and it might be just voluntarily helping people. And this is that component which comes always with salat. And that's why, for example, certainly in previous religions we didn't have zakat the same way it was legislated in Islam. But for example, in the case of Isa alayhi salam, you see he says, وَأَوْصَانِي بِالصَّلَاةِ وَالزَّكَاةِ مَا دُمْتُ حَيًّا. So that zakat should be more general than this, and it should exist everywhere, in every heart.
Yeah, can you pass the mic to the sister, please? Go back.
Assalamu alaikum. By zakat, are we to understand khums in our case? We give khums, we never talk of zakat at all. So how are we to understand that?
No, khums is completely a different thing. It's different than from zakat, and the type of items on which khums, to which khums would be compulsory, is of course certainly different from where zakat would be compulsory, or the items of zakat would be compulsory. The point is that the type of our job and our business is somehow in a way that would not make us qualified for paying zakat, at least according to the present fatwas of the Maraji, which is somehow questioned by many people recently. I mean, in our jurisprudence, technically the terms are taken to be very rigid, and when we are told that zakat comes on 8 items, for example, on wheat and barley, and then silver and gold, our fuqaha has taken silver and gold to be real silver and gold. Of course, silver and gold, which are used as coin and as a currency, which were completely common at that time. Now, of course, that is out of use, and therefore not many people, except the farmers and some special sectors of the society, would be liable to pay khums, to pay zakat. And I think this should be somehow addressed sooner or later, since we are now using banknotes and currencies which are not proper gold and silver. And this has actually excluded a great number of people from payment of khums and have exempted them. There is certainly something lacking there. However, of course, the fuqaha are very cautious not to give a ruling which is against what they find in the literature. But I know there is something here to do with the spirit of religion rather than with the letter of the religion. And I think this should be addressed. There are lots of discussions going on in the circle of jurists in Qom. Lots of articles are written about this, because there are very interesting and useful periodicals are coming out of different institutions in Qom, which are close to clerical circles. They are writing very good articles about this at the moment, and this is in process of debate. And I'm sure sooner or later this will be addressed by the Qur'an.
You mentioned that it is difficult at this moment, as far as the Islamic Republic is concerned, about imposing zakat in addition to the government taxes. The fact that zakat is so specific to certain categories in any case, couldn't the government, and it's been now 25 years, it's not as if it's been 5 years or 10 years, that might be difficult. Is there no way where they could have imposed zakat to this category of people instead of the government taxes, and at least that way they would be covering their obligations? Is there a reluctance on the part of the government that this is zakat, even khums is not taken in terms of obligatory, it is voluntarily accepted by the Maraji. Is it that they are reluctant to take this power upon themselves as considering it to be the right of the Imam only?
Yes, I think that there is something to do with this. The point is, since the Shias during the course of history did not accept the authority of the governments, the whole process of paying khums and zakat became some sort of voluntary on their side, and they didn't pay zakat to the governments. They didn't pay khums to. Of course, khums is for the imam, and then maraji get collected and distributed. So it's nothing to do with the state. And zakat was nothing to do with the state for them as well, because they said we distribute our own zakat, we don't give it to the governments because we do not accept them. And this attitude, you can see, is more than 1,000 years going on among the Shias. Now, in the course of 25 years, we want to change this. This is going to be very difficult. And it needs, I think, longer time to change the whole attitude of Shias with regards to their governments and what are the rights and responsibilities of a government. However, yes, there are still many Shia scholars who think that it is only the right of the Imam al-As to come and do these things, not the right of any government who claims to be an Islamic government. So long as these are not resolved, it is not possible to do such a thing, I think.
You want to say something?
I'll leave it for the moment. I'll let somebody else.
Let's go to the sisters.
This is what they are doing in Iran as well. They have left it for the moment.
Sisters, have you got any questions before we come back to brothers? Okay, Mizan.
If it's not today, I don't mind us addressing it next time, but I really would like to dwell a little bit more into the historical aspect of khums and how did it all develop on the concept that it is necessarily to be paid to the marja, and how did this connotation all arise historically? I'd like to know.
Yes, inshallah, maybe in one other occasion we have to dedicate one full session to this, inshallah, when the time comes.
You have another question? Sisters? Yeah, can you pass the mic, please?
Is zakat by law, you have to give it to your leader of the community, or you are yourself responsible to distribute it to whom you think is a needy person?
Well, nowadays, according to the fatwa of Maraji, yes, you yourself would recognize those places in which your zakat should be distributed. However, according to the verse, if there is a proper authority, then of course it is the responsibility of the state to collect the zakat and to distribute it evenly among the people. And it would become like a type of social security system, which collects all these money and property and then distributes it evenly among members of the society. However, nowadays, since there is no such a system in place, it is the person themselves who should decide how they have to distribute it.
Last question from Brother Omar.
I'd like to bring the Khawarij issue to 21st century London, and to this I'll illustrate. There was an event last Tuesday in the Regent's Park Mosque by the Muslim Council of Britain to propagate the idea that Muslims should get involved in the next coming elections. And the place got ransacked and invaded by a bunch of people shouting that voting is kufr, and their main slogan was the hukum belongs only to Allah, which was exactly the same slogan the Khawarij used to against Imam Ali. Now, my question really is, what hope do we have to deal with this spreading Khawarijism that's amongst the youth, especially British Muslim youth, if even the imams could not eradicate it or could not give this clear pattern for us to deal with it?
Yeah, this is very difficult. I think the only way is proper education, religious education of the people, and otherwise there is always this tendency among the faithful to go into that extreme. It's interesting, as you mentioned, they are saying La hukma illa lillah, because this is something which usually people with very shallow understanding of religion would have towards different issues, and then they relate everything to kufr. The answer of Amir al-Mu'mineen was very beautiful when, of course, they said La hukma illa lillah, and he said kalimatu haqqan yuradu biha batil. This is a word which is quite haq, but a batil is meant by it. What they mean by this is batil. Na'am, bala la hukma illa lillah. Of course, there is no ruling but for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَكِنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ لَا إِمْرَةَ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ. But they say there is no hukuma. Hukm is different from hukuma, government. They say there is no government but government of Allah. And of course, Allah doesn't have any government on the earth. It should go to the people. Now, this issue of governance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and government of people is always susceptible to be confused. And this is what we have to educate people about this. And especially Amir al-Mu'mineen mentions that وَلَا بُدَّ لِلنَّاسِ مِنْ أَمِيرٍ بَرًّا أَوْ فَاجِرٍ. Human beings need a government, and this government might be good, might be bad, might be evil, might be righteous, but they need a government. You cannot just say, we leave everything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this case, of course, this society would need a government, and that government, if you have influence upon it by your votes, then certainly is the right thing to do. But how we could tackle with that problem, well, I don't know. This is, as you mentioned, if big authorities could not deal with it, how could we? This is very difficult.
Okay, thank you very much, Sheikh. We have to close the session here.
Thank you.